I am.
I didn't see you. It is.
Be nice to be a good guy sometimes.
It's on.
Okay.
Thanks, though.
Okay, I think we're ready to begin. Welcome to the August 22nd, 2019 budget meeting. We'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Mark Schreiber. Councilman Schreiber, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Fitzwater.
Present.
Graham. Hensley.
Present.
Hussey.
Present.
Kimna.
Here.
Mahalovich.
Present.
Prather.
Here.
Schreiber.
Present.
Ward. Here. Wiseman.
Okay, on the agenda tonight is to look at the, review the presentations given to the council and then make any adjustments. We have a balanced budget as presented before us, and any changes we make to that to put on what we term the parking lot has to have an offset by the next meeting. I think that was our goal. So are there any discussions with regard to procedural or any need for anything from staff? Okay, yes, Steve.
I just mentioned that Margie provided an updated sheet with some of the summary information on it and the pink sheet, the capital items on it. So just so you put that at their place, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I believe the only change to that was the prosecuting attorney PT clerk provided to section 2 that it didn't have that on there the time before, right? Okay. So we're referring to as we approach this, as it's pretty easy to see right now, nothing's been funded, so otherwise it'd be in green for any of them, I think, except for maybe the parks and some other enterprise funds. So this will be the sheet we'll most likely pay attention to the most. And in terms of, I always refer back to the forecast, and I think we're coached to look at the 4% projected. At least I hope we are. Looking at that. At least it puts us in a positive fund balance in the future. So that's kind of my forecast that I will be referring to most of the time. Okay. I know that Councilman Graham is on his way, so he wanted to have a few statements, but
Mr. Chairman, let me ask one question. In the police department tab, there had been a line for, never mind, the radio tower that had been in the police tab. Has that been resolved through existing funding, or is that still an item on an active pink sheet?
Chief, could you respond to that?
Yeah, we've put effort into reducing the cost, working with Public Works, Matt's people, and been successful. They're going to work with us, and we're going to find the money, and you can remove that from our request.
Perfect. Thank you, Chief.
Clarification, Councilman Prather.
Just on procedures, kind of like we've done in the past, and I'd like to hold true to this, that if we have a tendency to want to fund things outside the budget, we need to keep that at a separate meeting, maybe go to one of the many meetings that we have, to one of the many committees, depends on which one it's appropriate for. So in other words, if we're tempted to go outside the budget and pull things from the general fund, that should be a different discussion than we should have tonight. Kind of like we did with wastewater last time.
The fund balance?
Right.
That's
Right,
right.
yeah, we talked about throwing wastewater into the budget I think it was last year or the year before, I can't remember which. Stormwater, sorry, not wastewater, sorry, you're correct, thank you. 2 years ago, so I'd like to hold true to that if we can.
Since you bring up the topic of fund balance as being outside the budget process, I wonder if we could get some sort of clarification on fund balance policy. Our city administrator has coached us on going to 20% fund balance, and we created a policy as a part of a process that was about 3 or 4 years ago, and we kind of started at about 17% is what we finally resolved to as what I would call, in my own terminology, restricted fund, and it's sort of restricted by policy. And do we know what the kind of the wording of that is, or can you?
Yes, we do have a financial policy in regards to the minimum fund balance. We've got a paragraph on it, a couple paragraphs on it. It's entitled Reserve or Stabilization Accounts, and the purpose is to provide guidelines to the City Council and staff for establishing, maintaining, and performing an annual review of the minimum and target fund balance reserves. The background is a minimum general fund reserve policy is generally considered a prudent and conservative fiscal policy to deal with unforeseen situations and long-term financial planning. Some examples of unforeseen situations include, but are not limited to, unfunded federal or state mandates, economic downturns, revenue shortfalls. Then it goes on to define the policy as the city calculates an unreserved, undesignated general fund balance at a minimum of 17% of operating expenditures as originally adopted for the general fund budget. These funds will be used to avoid cash flow interruptions, generate interest income, and reduce needs for short-term borrowing. All other funds, if they're not subsidized by other funds, shall maintain a minimum of 10% fund balance, for example, the wastewater fund and parking fund. The reserves shall be used when approved by formal city council action. Some examples of situations when approval by formal city council action is required include, but are not limited to, large one-time costs, unanticipated budgetary shortfalls, to mitigate service impacts during a significant economic downturn in the economy or significant and unexpected loss of revenue, catastrophic events or natural disasters that threatens the safety of persons and property within the city, and that the city sustains unexpected liabilities created by federal, state, or other mandates out of the city's control. So that's basically what's in our policy regarding the general fund balance and the use of fund balance. There's nothing specifically that says you can't use it to balance your budget, but I think the intent is that, a balanced budget is revenues matching expenditures, not a transfer of funds out of the fund balance. My opinion.
Okay. Councilman Graham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Margie, I heard you say that for parking and wastewater, it's 10%?
A minimum, yes.
A minimum. So if we're above 10% in those two areas and we're short in the fund balance, can we move money from these?
You can't move money from
You
enterprise funds or other funds into
Okay.
general fund.
Okay.
Any further questions with regard to this topic? The Finance Committee does get a report every meeting on this particular item. Watch it close, and I think we also have a list that we look at occasionally to say what can be funded if it does if it is greater than 17%. Okay. My own mind, I think there's some uncertainty of the impact of the flood and tornado, and that some of the fund balance will be used. I think that was confirmed by our city administrator.
Correct.
Within this year. So, Margie, would you kind of give us your best estimate of when you can confirm how much our carryover would actually be from this year?
Well, I provided some information to Steve. We're still compiling it. We've got hours and dollars for non-exempt staff, but not exempt staff.
Okay, you can go ahead with that, but my central question is, when will you know
Oh,
what our
when?
fund balance will be?
So our year end is October 31st, and because we're on an accrual basis, we won't know a more definite number until probably the end of the calendar year, because usually within 60 days of the end of the fund balance, there could be bills that we're still paying for the current fiscal year. So usually not until the end of December. And hopefully, the bills that we're talking about with the tornado and flood will have been paid by then.
You can go ahead into that conversation you were leading into. if
So
you
we've
like.
got some hours and dollar amounts for non-exempt staff that we know of. We have some accounts payable bills that we've paid, and we know of others that are going to be coming in shortly. So we're still compiling the information, but guess?
No.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to guess right now. I mean, we know some of that information, but I'd like to be able to, we're trying to get that all pulled together for you, so. And, but in the same token, we've been paying some of the bills that we have received. I mean, we've been getting some bills from different entities and corporations and things like that, so we've been paying those. Well, I should rephrase. We've been paying those, and we're running the accounts through a centralized account, so we know what those expenses are, but we are probably going to have to fund those with existing dollars in this current year, which I said, as was said before, is money that would typically go into fund balance. Does that make sense? Understand that?
It does to me.
And Margie did prepare a list of just how some of the fund balance was expended over the last couple of years, if that would be helpful. I
Is
could
that handed to us?
pass that out. No, I've got some copies here, is that not, so with that, I don't know if that's
It's,
pertinent or helpful for you or not.
Yes, yes. Let's go ahead and have that.
And this isn't the total dollar, these are just some large one-times that I pulled out.
Okay. Okay, I'm open for recognizing any of the council at this time, and even Council Lady Weissman, if it's appropriate, without any discussion. Councilman Graham.
Oh, I didn't raise my hand, but I guess you must know I wanted to say something. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we get into putting things on the parking lot, I did have some serious conversations with some members from the FOP in regards to some of the pink sheet items in which Chief Schrader has put on there. And I would like to hear from the FOP president, Mr. Bowman, and anyone else who would like to speak on their request for police cars and officers. I know that sometimes when we look at the surface of things, we see it's just cars and we see it's just personnel, but I think hearing it from the individuals who are on the street, the individuals who are out there protecting us and trying to protect themselves as they do their job for the city of Jefferson. So, but before I do that, well, I'm just going to go ahead and see if Mr. Bowman would like to come forward, or Detective Ambler, whoever would like to come and speak to the council. I know it's something that we have done in the past before. I think I was questioned about us doing this, but it has been done in the past, so I just want to be able to recognize them as we're going to talk about these pink sheet items. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. I appreciate it. Chairman Mihalovich, the rest of the Budget Committee, I'd like to offer my sincere thank you for this opportunity. My name is Jeremy Bowman. I'm the president of the Jefferson City Police Officers Association, Fraternal Order Police Lodge 19 here in Jefferson City. This is Executive Vice President Jason Ambler, and I'll let him introduce himself here shortly. We really appreciate this opportunity, and as a Fraternal Order of Police, we have many missions through the community, charity, things like that. A list too long to list, but one of our biggest missions is to take care of our members. That in and of itself could be a long list, but one of those missions for our members is to assure their safety, and those are some things we want to address and bring up this afternoon, or this evening. For our members, safety is obviously an important issue, and in following up with that, I think a common assumption of safety is a functioning firearm, proper pepper spray, that our handcuffs are up to date, that our tasers are up to date, our laptops in our cars, our dash cameras, well-functioning and up-to-date canines, things of that nature, things that bring safety to us. But I think one of the most overlooked items of safety is patrol cars, and I'll try to explain. It's pretty common that when people look at mileage on vehicles, that's how they assess the condition of a vehicle. And I would like the committee to take this information under their professional consideration with the budget, is that mileage is a little different with a patrol car. I'd like to describe it as an asterisk at the end of mileage. And that asterisk means many things. Patrol cars, we accelerate heavy, we brake heavy, we take sharp turns at times. In times of emergencies, we respond with speeds that aren't normal of a regular car. And these things in turn take damage to the engine. There's a lot of idling time in patrol cars, as they can't be shut off and turned on all the time because either equipment's running or there's bad weather outside and we have to keep the ice off windshields for an emergency call, things of that nature. So I just asked the committee to consider that when they look at your sheets and you just see mileage, it's much more than mileage. You can go a step further with that when our members are in police cars with higher mileage vehicles, that's a grave concern to us for our safety. As we respond to emergency calls for service, we hope that our guns are working and all of our equipment around us are working properly, but we need to get from point A to point B successful. In doing so, the officer needs to have the confidence that when the time happens and when their skills need to be provided to the community, that all their equipment is functioning properly. We want our patrol cars to get us where we need to get safely so we can use the rest of our tools to protect ourselves, protect the community, and etc. We have a few items we'd like to bring up, and this is where I'll introduce Executive Vice President Jason Ambler. and then we'll stand for any questions.
Thanks. Good evening, guys. Like President Bowman said, thank you for the opportunity. A few things that stick out in our mind in talking to other members that we represent. The vehicle that you see as far as a black and white driving down the road, protecting your communities, your neighborhoods, that is that officer's office. That is where they conduct 90% of the business they do. They do reports from there. They collect evidence out of it. It is a vital part of their day. Officer safety concerns are obviously, that's self-explanatory when it comes to older equipment. A safe vehicle in dangerous situations is mandatory for an officer to do their job effectively. Having reliable vehicles gives a confidence level to that officer that they are safe in knowing that if they have to go 100 miles an hour down the highway, the car is going to hold up. Confidence, no matter if it's in uniform or in a vehicle, leads to productivity, which in return, that productivity leads to a level of safety in the community given their performances. Safe vehicles continue a level of service that your citizens, the people that elect you, have known to love and demand from us. We want to continue that. As President Bowman said, I would caution that when you see a clean vehicle, that's a reflection of the officer. That's a reflection of their dedication to the job. You cannot give any bearing on how clean a vehicle is on the outside to the direct correlation to the engine, suspension, and other vital parts of the car that cause the wear and tear. Crime. Crime is up. There's no denying it. Severity of the crimes is also on the rise. The overall call volume that we go to is constantly growing. Weapons offenses, where there's no one shot but yet shell casings are found. Actual shootings where individuals are shooting each other. Taking guns off of criminals. It used to be if we found one gun a week, it was noteworthy. You remembered that one call for your entire work week. Guys talked about it in the hallways. Now it is, you're averaging a gun a day that officers are taking off people while trying to keep the streets safe. While we agree our job is dangerous, we don't advance and handle calls of these severity on our own. We request help from each other. The cars have to perform when an officer is screaming at times, begging for help. We don't leave anyone behind. We're rushing to get there to protect each other. All this, I remind you, is while we are trying to maintain the same level of service and efficiency that citizens grow to expect. The high mileage that's talked about on some of these, on the cars that are being requested to be removed from service, they are expected approximate to have 140,000 miles approximately if they are not replaced. That crosses into a danger zone where these cars are going to have to be grounded because they are not safe for our type of driving when we have to. The argument of doubling up officers to cut down on the mileage does not constitute the lack of coverage that you give to the citizens when we do that. There is no greater priority or function of a government entity than to provide health, welfare, and public protection to its citizens. When we talk about the officers that Chief Schrader has requested through the budget, salary is always going to be a topic of discussion. I think all of us in this room can agree tonight's not the night that we're going to address the shortfall and how to correct it. I will caution that in talking to other members, we are on a dangerous slope of falling out of the competition It used to be Jefferson City was where every officer wanted to come. We're slowly falling out of that competition. I just caution that we need to be aware of that. The pride and tradition that we carry as officers can only go so far. I thank you, and like President Bowman said, we're more than happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Officer Bowman and Ambler? Follow up? Councilman Graham.
I just wanted to say, as the chairman of Public Safety, which is both police and fire, I appreciate what you guys do each and every day, and I'm sure I'm echoing the words of each and every one of these council members and our mayor of here. So I just want to say that it's up to us to make sure that we keep pushing to make sure that you all remain safe as you all keep this community safe. I know I read in the paper each and every day someone being arrested for a gun charge, or I think today I saw in the paper someone made a terroristic threat here in the city of Jefferson. Those things are the things that you all face each and every day. And so I would just ask this body, as we get ready to go through these through this pink sheet item, that we strongly consider the police officer as well as the police vehicles as we move forward. So I know it's not going to be a nice scenario for us, but I think we need to keep this at the forefront as we go through this. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman.
I had a couple comments, and I'll echo Councilman Graham's thanks to you all for being here and for those great comments. And I'm sure that we're all in agreement that funding as many of these vehicles as we can possibly find a way to do is a priority. And I'll just say, maybe a month ago, maybe a little over a month ago, a few of us had just finished having dinner over at Echo Lounge, and we were standing on the sidewalk there on Dunklin, and as far as we were concerned, out of nowhere came at least an 8 or 9 vehicle high-speed pursuit that one or more of you all may have been involved in, flying eastbound on Dunklin a little bit after dark. So at that point, it might have been 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. There was one vehicle being chased by maybe 7 or 8 law enforcement vehicles. At least one or more of them were from Holt Summit, maybe. So this has been going on for a little while. First of all, I'd never seen something like that so close. I mean, and by close, I mean 15 or 20 feet from the road where we were standing. The thing that kind of surprised all of us a little bit was the smell. And maybe you all don't experience it because you're in the vehicle. The smell of burning or melting rubber and the oil that's involved is probably something I'll never forget. But it was just a great example of how the demand on these vehicles physically and as machines is obviously so much greater than what we experience in our civilian vehicles. So we're obviously fortunate that no one was hurt in our observation, but certainly also grateful for that firsthand lesson in that we're talking about 2 different kinds of animals here when we're talking about these vehicles. So again, thank you all very much, and we're going to do the best we can here.
Thank you, sir.
If I may, you bringing that up, Councilman Hensley, is prime example of what we're trying to explain. When you say a couple weeks ago there was a pursuit, in my mind, and I'm sure other members would say the same, I don't know which pursuit you're talking about. That's the reality of this. The fact is, there was a pursuit during the day today. Crime doesn't happen just at night. Patrol cars don't get driven just hard at night. It's an ongoing thing. While I'm sure the outcome of that was a safe one for regards to us, I can't put my mind to when, that one was. So that's just, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Councilman Graham.
Just before we jump into the pink sheet items, I know this has been heavy on my mind, and I said something about it last week, as relates to under the pink sheet item for police and the radio tower. I was going to ask tonight if that's something that can be removed from the pink sheet item request and to see if police have that in their budget to do that now instead of waiting to this budget process. So this is a $15,000 request. So I'm asking Chief. They already taken off?
Yeah.
Oh.
Right before you got here.
Oh, well, thank you so very much.
No.
Now let's get started. Let's go.
Okay. Councilman Hensley.
I've done a little bit of work on stuff I'd like to see and stuff other folks have said they'd like to see. And I think at this point, I will just move to add 3 specific things to the parking lot. There are plenty of other things to add, and I'm sure we'll get to those things, but the 3 right now that I would move to add are the Law Department's summer law clerk, the city prosecutor's part-time prosecutor clerk, and the citywide internship program under Human Resources. And again, that is with the caveat that we are going to, I believe, work as sort of a separate matter on the police vehicle issue. But I've identified maybe $67,000 in potential rearranged funding across a dozen or more of the departmental budgets that would take care of these things. The police vehicles, I think, are going to be sort of a larger budget structural discussion that is it's in a different league than sort of these much smaller budget items, so I don't want to give anyone the impression that we're ignoring that issue. But just to kick things off tonight, I'd like to move to put these things on, and then we can work through my sheet or through someone else's sheet if they have suggestions about how to fund these things. One thing I will say, though, and I'm not going to make this motion tonight, certainly not while this one's still pending. There was a discussion a moment ago about fund balance usage for purposes of budget setting. And one thing I will mention is I will eventually make the motion that we dedicate around $21,000 that will, at the end of this fiscal year, lapse, or that would otherwise lapse into the fund balance that almost a year ago we appropriated for the internship program, but that went unspent and it's still sitting there. It is my intention to move this body to apply those funds to the appropriation authority for those funds to next year's internship program. I think we've already approved that money or that spending on that program. The fact that the decision was made by someone not to spend it on the program that we had pretty clearly communicated should be made more robust is unfortunate, but that money stands appropriated for this purpose, and I will be asking my colleagues to allow that appropriation to run forward into the next fiscal year. I know that there are perceived hurdles about the correct venue and timing for that, and I respect those opinions. But the fact is, we've already approved this funding for this purpose, and rather than seeing that important program shuttered for the city and for the young people who live here, who were raised here, and who might return here over the summer, I think we owe it to everybody to push that spending authority forward. So that being said, I would move that. I would move just that those 3 items that I mentioned earlier be added to the parking lot as additional funded items.
Okay. With the caveat that next budget meeting, you will have the offsets or for those. Okay. Any other discussion?
I will also add, it appears that Margie is throwing up some of the items from my list of potential funding sources for this, and I appreciate her doing that so everyone can see. And then we will, I guess, maybe whittle down some of these items and find funding for these additional items. Thank you.
Councilman?
Just procedurally, do we formally go through the motion, second, and vote on these additions, or is it just throw things up there and have until next meeting to clarify, or to work it out? I mean, I think internally.
I don't believe during these deliberations, I think your task
Okay.
with the offset, so I'd say it's like a nomination. You don't need a second.
My only point was I didn't necessarily want to dedicate the entire time of this particular meeting to this particular purpose if there were other items that we wanted to get to, knowing that we had next meeting as well, if that was appropriate.
Sure. Are there any other discussion on the parking lot? I
have a question.
Councilman Graham.
I know, Councilman Hensley, we've had conversations, so do you want to go ahead and put the vehicles on there now? And have a conversation about it next week, or you just want to just deal with these here first?
That is, of course, we talked about, I would design in a way that I hope we don't have to get into. In a way that I hope we don't have to get into, identified up to a couple $100,000 more. I'm sure not all of that will be able to go to this purpose, but roughly 5 vehicles worth just from looking at the budget. I'm wondering though, and we've had the discussion about fund balance tonight, are there other, and I've spent most of my time just going through the tabs in this enormous binder, are there other revenue sources available for this? Is there sales tax funding that can be dedicated, that's already been earmarked for police vehicle usage, where that, it wouldn't be a stretch to apply it to this?
Sales tax G has been used for fire apparatus and fire vehicles. I'm not sure in the past if it's been used for police vehicles, but the message to the citizens when sales tax G was voted on just included some pretty vague language about use for public safety, for equipment, and it didn't, I don't think it specifically said we're going to buy police vehicles out of it, but I don't think the language that was used would preclude it.
Do we have a sense of roughly how much would have been specified for police department or potentially police equipment or vehicle usage?
Yeah, the sales tax G had it broken out into sections about the use of the money for public works, public safety, parks, information technology, and it did have, over the life of the 5-year tax, the total estimate for the revenues were $25 million, and of that, public safety was $5 million. That's over a 5-year life of the sales tax G.
So that's about
And
$1 million.
that's split between fire and police.
So that's about $1 million a year.
Steve.
And I would just add that I know that there were several projects that were discussed as part of the police, and maybe Chief Schrader could certainly speak to those projects in more detail if you wanted to.
I believe there's a $500,000 in there scheduled for this year, Chief.
I don't remember.
And do you have a priority of that $500,000?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because a few years ago, on the advent of sales tax G, we established a budget for the 4 full years and the 2 partial years and then what we would expend in each of those years. So Beth's trying to locate some more specifics. Of course, we have carryover, things of that nature.
Got it.
One reason that didn't jump out at us to utilize for cars is we have identified needs in a lot of other areas. And so that's our only resource excluding this process. And, you know, for instance, police vests and firearms that need replacing, and there's a lot of things that we felt were priorities that we wouldn't bring to the council, but rather utilize sales tax G. So there's a bunch of stuff that would be displaced or not available to us if we utilized, to any great extent, that resource for cars. For instance, besides those two items I mentioned, we have some SWAT needs, our mobile data terminals that we place in the cars. They're really all priorities and all related to officer safety in some way, shape, or form. So we could, if given a little time, we could be more specific. And then each of those items is designated for purchase in one of those 5 years for the term of sales tax G. So we have a budget with a certain amount that varies from year to year, and then generally what we wish to purchase each year. And cars are not one of those. It doesn't mean it's not an absolute priority, but traditionally that's how we supplemented our budget for other public safety or law enforcement needs.
Thank you. Councilman Hussey.
Margie, I apologize if I have this in front of me, but the sheet you're referencing in regards to sales tax G, and I know that times I think it's given to the Finance Committee, is that something that can be shared with the council, just so we have a sense of
Yeah,
breakdown?
I'm referring to a brochure that was put out
I guess,
for the...
or do we have, I guess, maybe not the brochure, but if we have like a...
Actual ballot language.
Well, not ballot, well, that, but also just current status and where we're at.
Tab
Maybe- Is that in tab 3?
Tab 3.
Because I know we mentioned, okay, so here's my point. We mentioned the 25 million as being available,
Yeah, 333.
which I get, but like, and I know that budget-wise, that's a safe number, and some projects go over, and there's a little bit extra. And I just wonder, like, since our sales tax projections in the budget for the city, I mean, they're pushing in 2020 about 11.8 million, which is closer to, I'd assume it'd be 5.9 million per year in that particular half-cent sales tax. Like, are we hitting the point, and maybe this is a conversation for sales tax H, that it should be budgeted as a $30 million sales tax, $6 million a year, as opposed to the 5-year 5? Like, is there space in there? Do we have unspent money in that sales tax on an annual basis? And Steve's laughing because you kind of wait till the end and things balance out. I get it. But are we overlooking a source to get a vehicle or two, whether it's police or some other areas?
There is gleaning. We've used that term before, but if you remember, on our Finance Committee reports every month, we have spent that money
Okay,
on Fire Station 2.
that's right.
And other things.
And then-
That's not sales tax money, that's general fund.
Oh, that's our fund balance over.
And then I want
Right.
to clarify, Steve, just so I make sure, earlier your comment about the fund balance and disaster and tornado flood, and you said, is that clear? And I think we all said yes, but I just want to make sure that I heard you, that, because the comment's been made, we're going to need to use the fund balance, and I think what I'm hearing you say is that the net at the end of this fiscal year that would normally go to the fund balance is what we're dipping into. And so your hope is that the current balance of the fund balance would not necessarily need to be touched, that really what is going to have to be spent is what you usually project every year and through cost savings and holding expenses tight, that instead of like we did in 2018, well, 18 is probably a bad example because was a slight decrease, but you go back a couple years where maybe $1 million was going into the fund balance at the end of the fiscal year, your projection would be, that's not going to happen this year because we are going to have spent that because of these disaster expenses.
Correct. It would be less. A month ago, I might have hoped that we wouldn't have to have any supplementals out of, the fund balance. That just remains to be seen. But yes. And the other piece of it that we don't know, we expect, but just don't know the number of what the FEMA reimbursement will be and when that comes in and, over time or how that comes in. So there's another revenue piece that will be coming in to have council figure out how to deal with that when it does come in.
Yeah, and I guess for clarity's sake, to ease my mind, is that you're not anticipating that we're going to have to go below 17% at this particular point in time because of that, or?
We may have to use, so we may.
Okay.
And the alternative would be is just to do everything the way we've done it, and then, we got a larger fund balance and we start doing a whole bunch of supplementals. But the problem is we have bills coming in now. I mean, we've been paying them, and so, somehow we got to figure that out, and it's really, to me at least, it's taken out of one pocket before you put it into the other pocket.
So just the two pots that a lot of people look at to fund major things is the capital improvement sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
We've gleaned a lot of that. It's offset increased expenses on some capital projects, so it's not. And the second thing, the fund balance, which is shaky at 17% at best and a bit uncertain moving forward.
And an item that you brought up also is to look at, additional revenue sources. I mean, that's an option too. And don't mean to throw, a wrench in it, but we also are still waiting for final numbers on health insurance. Okay. So we need to be able to, we're trying to get that hopefully by Monday.
Okay.
But
thank you.
Councilman Prather.
Kind of follow up with Steve on...
I'm sorry, can I just finish something? So on page 332 and 333 are the sales tax kind of numbers there. So it's a little bit of a summary, and you can see some of the project pieces, and so that information's there. Doesn't mean, you can't use it for other sources, as Roger noted, so, sorry.
No, you mentioned the disasters, and we don't really have a number. Are we going to have to rebuild the airport terminal?
Yes. Yeah,
and where's that money coming from?
Council.
Personally?
Yeah, well, the staff is now, and Matt may be able to add some more on that, but staff now is looking at potential funding sources and what sources may be out there for mitigation kinds of funds and things we may be able to use for that kind of project now. We just got I don't know if it's been delivered yet, but we're getting a trailer out there to help provide some office space out there during the interim. And we've got a lot of things to still work through, but following our own rules, and I think some of the realization of the terminal status and condition will probably need to be demolished and talk about what replaces it and when and how. And that's a long process. So we got to have a discussion and what do you all want, and then figure out some design and get some costs. So that's not a year process. That's a multi-year process, or at least two. Matt, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
We had an airport advisory committee meeting last week, and I was real impressed how staff had really outlined a plan for how to proceed. I was real interested in telling our people that are out there renting from us to have confidence that we're putting money back into the airport, and we are. But I asked, should we consider fund balance for the terminal building, and staff said not at this time because there are outside sources that very well could be used at this point. So the advisory committee left it up to staff to study it and come back to that and advise. And at some point, you may even get a request from the advisory council to do something, but they made no recommendation as of yet. Chief.
Yeah, just to add more clarity, Beth found some more figures, and our portion of sales tax G is 1.9 million. It wasn't just split down the middle. And one thing I neglected to mention, the biggest part of that we've earmarked is 911. We have a lot of IT needs, and for instance, the mass notification system was from sales tax G, and so our earmarking of funds during that 5-year term, about 36% is earmarked to go to the 911 center, for instance.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Hensley.
It's okay. Chief, just to follow up on that, I found the correct tab with Steve's help. So would the 911 items be under the police renovation and upgrades line? The PD information systems improvement?
It would be under the communications subsection.
Okay, well, I'm looking at sales tax G, the 4 items related to the police department. You had police field operation, or I assume it's police field operation equipment, tabbed at around 60,000. Police, I assume renovation and upgrades, around 300. Emergency siren system doesn't appear to have anything devoted to it at this point. And PD information systems improvement is tabbed at about 20 so far in this particular budget. And as we discuss this, I'm just trying to figure out which of those might be spoken for already. But if it takes till next meeting, that's fine.
You looking at this year or next year?
I'm looking at
Current
the
year?
2020 mayor approved
2020, okay.
line item, or column, I guess.
So you want a kind of a summary status report of current year funding and then 20?
Not necessarily. We're just, as we are trying to figure out if any of which of this money might apply to this purpose, just trying to figure out what the lay of the land is, that's all. And if I may, while my mic is still on, just a little bit of housekeeping. Sorry. Margie, if you would remove the non-departmental gas line there. I was educated this afternoon that is not a worthwhile thing to go after for offsetting revenue purposes by you. And then if you would also, I think I might have transposed a number in the lapsed intern funding program, and just to be safe, would you change that from 21.3 to just $21,000, please, in the offset? Great, thank you.
21,000 even, is that?
Just 21,000. I think it might be like 21,003 or whatever, but I don't want to get us $300 off out of whack. Thank you very much.
Just for the occupied dead air, I won't sing. But if it were, I'm just going to put this on the parking lot. I do not have an offset, but I feel it's important, as a lot of all these are, but this raises to, I really feel that, especially with the tornado, it's going to be, we're going to be asked in more than one way to come up with creative ways to try to rebuild. So I believe that the Chapter 353 request from law at $15,000 is important. It's a tool, it'll be another tool in our tool bag. 353s are used. If you remember the discussion in absence, we have our counselor here. And you can test me and see if it's used in the same way that our housing authority as a land clearance authority is today. So we have excellent working relationships with our land clearance housing authority. We have a great board, but in absence of that, this would be our tool. And then it gives us a bit more flexibility. I don't know, Councilor, if you'd like to say anything else. What's?
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, we're done.
That's one mechanism that it can be used for. It's a really flexible tool, and so that is but one thing that it can be used for.
Well, right answer.
Okay.
Time's up. Got to buy a vowel here.
Yeah.
Procedural, we talked at the beginning of this budget, that we would allow, if we're taking something away from an department, we would allow whoever the department is, if they wish to do so, to kind of say why they need it and why we should take it. So I don't know when that's going to apply, or when we're going to have that, they're going to have that opportunity.
Councilman Graham.
Yes, I know that a couple of council members had a conversation about 5 police vehicles, but I think that we can somehow squeeze 6. So I'd like to put 6 police vehicles on the lot. I know the conversation wasn't too good about an extra police officers, but I'm going to start at least with 1 additional police officer. And then I have a couple of questions too. And I'm just trying to get educated. Can someone tell me about the jail tax? If we take someone to jail, do we get monies for that? Is that and I heard a rumor that the county has like so many millions of dollars sitting over there. Just if somebody could explain to me about the jail tax, do we get any of that revenue? Could that help offset something?
I think you're referring to the law enforcement tax.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that, of course, I think was promoted to build the jail, and the city doesn't receive any funds from that tax. It's the law enforcement tax. I think the wording, and I've checked, it basically says county law enforcement, which has been interpreted as only county law enforcement, not law enforcement within the county. Therefore, it doesn't provide any funding for us.
That seems odd. So we don't get a dime for.
No, sir.
Will we better off just building our own jail?
To just add to the conversation, so part of the agreement, when that passed to fund the jail, when the city brings someone to the county jail, we don't get charged for that. That person who is being held is held at the county jail, and in a lot of situations, a municipality would have to pay the county jail to house that person who needs to be held. And here in Jefferson City, we don't pay anything to the county jail to do so. So that is probably a small portion of what that tax covers, but that is something that the city does receive as essentially a free jail.
I'm sorry, I just want to add, though, it's my position that they have to take, as a county facility, all state-charged prisoners. They can't charge me for state-held offenders or alleged offenders. So then, that would limit the amount that they may arguably be able to charge to only those lodged for city ordinance violations, which really reduces to a great extent the number of people that are held, particularly with the effort with pre-release programs and other types of things that are going on. They're trying to get people out or not hold them for minor violations, so that really reduces the number of city prisoners that they might charge us for. But in my opinion, state-charged prisoners they have to take.
To add to that, it's at least $80 a day for somebody to be in jail, and that's for an hour or 24 hours, and that's usually a minimum. So.
And I can't answer because I've heard so many different figures, and some of it might just depend contractually on what the federal government agrees to pay, or other counties agree to pay. Certainly Sheriff Wheeler can ask for whatever, it's his jail, but I think the number varies, so I don't, we'd have to ask John.
In previous experience in other places in the state, I think $100 to $150 per night is, or per day is what I'm remembering. So
I'm going to go ahead and turn our attention back to the present budget and budget concerns. I think this would be an excellent conversation to continue to explore in public safety meetings, because nothing we could say here today will change the actual budget, but thank you for bringing that up, Councilman Green.
Yeah, I just wanted to try to get educated on it because I was dumb in that area.
Councilman Hensley.
Thank you. It might be helpful, turning to the parking lot items, just for sake of conversations with staff and our colleagues over the next few days, over these and other items. If we address briefly the rolling forward the soon-to-be lapsed intern program funding, just so we know if we need to find another $20,000 somewhere, or if we can save it from the fund balance. I know that technically it might, for a nanosecond, drop into the fund balance for purposes of being pushed back out again to the 2020 budget. But just knowing how big a project we're working on here, I would like to start discussion and then move my colleagues to approve the $21,000 of potentially lapsed intern program funding from 2019 into 2020. I think the argument is pretty clear, and straightforward and common sense, and the mechanism might be a little bulky, but let's not let this program die. Let's continue devoting the funds that we've already earmarked for this program to this program. I mean, it'll be a net even for the general fund. The money's not in there yet. As soon as this fiscal year is over, it'll fall in there. And it's only falling in there because we didn't spend it on what we said we were going to spend it on. So let's spend it on what we said we were going to spend it on.
Councilman Prather.
Margie, can you tell us the correct procedures to make that happen, if we can make that happen?
Well, technically, it'd be the use of fund balance.
That'd be a supplemental.
Is there a policy against that currently?
No, technically, it would just be a supplemental, it'd be a supplemental appropriation that they decide to make.
Is there a policy against?
Outside of the budget process.
Yeah.
Is there a policy against this currently?
The policy that we have regarding the minimum fund balance does not specifically prohibit the use of fund balance to balance the budget.
It's a slippery slope.
It is balanced. It will remain balanced. This item is only falling in there because someone else didn't spend it.
But you're crossing fiscal years. That's
it is a net zero.
Councilman Prather.
I don't disagree with the worthiness of having the money for being used for what it was originally intended for, but procedurally, I'm 100% against taking anything out of the fund balance while we're in a budget talk. I think it can be done outside the budget. I think that as we did the stormwater, it can be done separate from the budget process. I don't think we need to be dipping into the fund balance for the budget process. We haven't done it in the past that I recall, and I wouldn't like to start it now.
Councilman Hensley.
I take a slightly broader view of budgeting. I think with budgeting, you are looking at your revenues, your cash on hand, your known expenditures, and your projected expenditures. And if I look at it as on a different project, had we allowed the purchase of 10 police vehicles in the current budget year, and only 5 had managed to get purchased this year, and we had $150,000 that had already been devoted to police vehicles sitting in there, I would feel exactly the same way. It is a net zero effect on the otherwise existing fund balance. I'm not saying let's take 20 grand that's in there right now and put it towards next year's intern program. It's apples and oranges. Yeah, I completely agree with avoiding drawing from the fund balance in all but an absolute emergency, worst-case scenario situation. But this, it would not be in there ever if we had actually spent according to our spending directives last year. And the consequence is either additional administrative burden, in best case, or worst case, losing a worthy program. So my motion is on the table.
Your motion really in terms of that's the way you would proceed.
Just with respect to the $21,000 on the lapsed 2019 intern program, just so we know if we need to find another 20 because of this.
Back to procedural, I think what we will ultimately do after these, I consider nominations, which don't need second, we will put them on the parking lot, and at some point, we will have a motion to accept the parking lot in a second, and we will have discussion.
So by the end of next meeting, what has to happen? I thought for the changes that I suggested adding, we needed to find approved offsets. I am trying to provide an approved offset with this lapsed funding. If that's not going to be approved by the council, then we got to cut $21,000 more from these budgets. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yes, I
how big our job
understand.
is.
So I guess what, if I'm kind of struggling here for how to proceed with this. That would require us to look at your offsets one-on-one and say, we agree or we disagree. Is that the procedure?
If we want to go through every single one of them, that's fine. I'm just asking for this particular one to take the council's temperature.
Oh.
Because it is a little unique. And if we were going to go another way on this, it would be a meeting, I guess, of the finance committee and not of this whole budget committee. And then talking about doing a pre-supplemental for next year's budget already before this budget's even passed. And why we need to do that, I have absolutely no idea. But yeah, I'm most interested in that one offset.
Okay, I'd say then, if you're interested in making that a motion, you can make a motion, get a second, and then we can deliberate it, and then we can pass it or not. So if you want to...
The motion's there.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to put as an offset the lapse, I can't read it from here, lapse 2019 interim funding. Discussion. Councilman Fitzwater.
A question in regard to, for lack of a better term, this proposed process. Are you saying if we're taking money out of a fund, trying to move it to the next year, it has to go right back in that specific line item, or, for the next time we do this, can it come from one and go to fund a separate item?
My effort here is only with respect to this particular line item, returning it to its existing line item. Actually, it's not even a line item. It sort of exists out there. It's within like part-time employment and compensation or something. That's how we're running our intern program. But I'm not talking about devoting it to a different use. I'm not talking about to a different budget, to even a different line item within its existing budget. I'm just saying let's continue funding this program with the same appropriation.
But just to follow up on the comments from Councilman Prather, there's nothing that locks us into having to use that if we're going to open this process up, and I guess that's my concern, that it's not specific, it doesn't have to specifically be earmarked for that line item. Yeah, I understand we can do things one at a time, but I agree, we're setting up a precedent that I'm not sure we want to head down.
I'll go ahead and comment as well. I do feel strongly about this one precedent, because what you do at the end of the year, you sweep all the accounts, and then you put them in that fund balance, and then it's up for deliberation of how to spend that through supplemental. If it were a police car, we still have time to buy a police car. In this instance, this is a summer program. So the urgency to fund it at this moment, if we could right now, we could actually have the money, we could fund it, but it doesn't occur until next summer. My recommendation is to go ahead and still wait till we understand our fund balance, and our fund balance may dip below 17%, and if it does that, game's off for me. I'm not spending below our 17% unless it's flood or tornado or disaster related in my own mind. So let's wait till December, see what we have. We might be funding police cars, might be funding, and that's not a statement to this program, because I'm a big advocate of it, and I think Carlos and myself, and maybe even, I know Carlos and myself were involved in higher ed, so we were for this program, so that's not the point at all. And I appreciate your arguments for it. Councilman Hensley.
Thank you. And I appreciate those concerns, and, people say a lot that, a budget's just a plan. Budgets are also priorities, and they indicate a person's and a community's priorities. And anything that doesn't go into this budget will not be part of this plan. The idea of us coming back next spring and approving a supplemental for $20,000 to continue the internship program, I think, is unrealistic. But there will be $21,000 that we had already approved to support the internship program sitting in the general fund because someone not sitting here chose not to spend it. So I think I'm going to, no matter what anyone else says, I think I'm going to rest on the rest of my comments and cede the floor.
Any discussion left? Okay, Councilman.
I guess there's a couple questions. I tend to think that the council is supportive of the internship program. Or over the years, we've added it back in 3, 4, 5 times, I think, since I've been on the council. And it's a unique funding mechanism to get there. And so I guess if this current offset's not approved, it seems as though the pleasure of the council then is for Councilman Hensley and others who are advocates for the program to carve out $21,000 in savings out of projected 2020 expenses to make up for it. And then, that being said, it's going to potentially leave some other things that could be unspent. Now, granted, maybe nothing gets put into the fund balance at the end of this fiscal year, which is a plausible situation. Or some monies do get put on there. And then it just, is the council then going to want to go back and agree with the perspective that those funds were dedicated in one fiscal year for a particular purpose, not spent, and pull back to balance that back out? I don't know. I know it's a unique way of thinking of things. I respect the various opinions on it for sure. It seems as though time and time again this council has found a way to put an internship program in the budget and has chosen to make it a priority. And so I would hope that the council would again agree to do so and try to do so in a with respect. I guess we're kind of stuck is that last year was a battle to get the increased funding for it. And I get that within a large budget, things move through line items and you spend less in one category because you have to spend more in other categories. Maybe it doesn't feel that way on this one. And to not spend within an internship line item to offset higher expenses in a supply or equipment, whatever you might do that, just might not sit well. It doesn't feel good. Maybe you hold down your toner expenses because you have to buy more of another office supply, but I don't know what the balance was and maybe why that wasn't spent the same way. And so I feel like this is important. I see the logic, and I don't think we're setting a dangerous precedent by supporting it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to break my word, if you don't mind, that I promised about 4 minutes ago. And just to wrap it up again, a net zero effect on what would otherwise be the fund balance. And this is roughly the value of half of a police car. So if we don't fund it through this, rolling forward the existing appropriation amount, that's $20,000 more that we're going to have to pull somewhere out of the budget that would otherwise go towards half a police vehicle, I think. And maybe there are other priorities that people are going to bring forward in this or future meetings, but this seems to be about the size of the field right now. So those are my final comments, probably. Thank you.
Councilman Fitzwater.
Yeah, I just want to follow up my comments. And again, my comments, I echo it. It has nothing to do with the program. I am very supportive of the program. We use interns at our office, and they're very beneficial. But this is not the first time money has lapsed back into the general fund, and I'm just not comfortable with the process, and I just think it's not the way to do it. I'm committed to try to find dollars, other ways to fund this program, but just not this route.
Okay. Any further discussion? Looks like we're prepared to vote. I have the clerk read the motion.
The motion is to use the $21,000 that lapsed from FY 2019 for intern funding and appropriate it to FY 20 intern funding.
Everybody understand the motion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
Nay.
Nays have it.
Mr. Chair, roll call, please.
Okay, we'll have a roll call.
Roll call, please.
Fitzwater,
No.
Graham,
Yes.
Hensley,
Aye.
Hussey,
Aye.
Kimna,
No.
Mahalovich,
No.
Prather,
No.
Schreiber,
Aye.
Ward, Wiseman.
Aye.
6 ayes, 4 noes. Ayes have it.
Motion fails. Passes.
Passes.
Tried twice, didn't I? Okay, well, then it stands on the parking lot. Any other discussion? Yes, Councilman Hussey.
I apologize, Chief Schrader, if, I think at one of the previous budget meetings, we had a conversation about vehicles, and there was questions about the size of the fleet and the status of certain vehicles. Do you have some information you could share that, I think we've talked about 27 patrol cars that we're talking about, just, and you provide mileage on the, is it 13? 13 in the budget. Do you have information on the other 14 so we can have a better sense as to the current status of the 27 vehicles in the fleet, and that I like to start to think ahead. If we're only able to do 5 or 6 or 7 this year, well, I know that we've still got 6 or 7, but what's coming next year? What you know what I mean? You can tell what I'm asking for, just to start being a little more proactive, or at least inform the council. And then my second question, in the 9 vehicles that we funded last year, if we had a report back just how those vehicles were used the past year in terms of mileage on them, or were they patrol vehicles, where those were assigned in particular. Patrol vehicle in the budget line item sometimes, or we just say police vehicle, can be pretty broad. I don't know if there are particular types of vehicles that would be better to fund, or if we leave that discretion up to the department. If we fund 5, do we dictate what those 5 specifically do? And so it would be helpful information if you had it for us.
Thank you. I'll try to explain this as simply as possible, and that is where they're assigned depends on, we could total a car tomorrow and change it, turn everything upside down. What we do is we move the higher mileage vehicles that aren't replaced and may put them in a less emergency type of assignment, like the school resource officers. They rarely respond into anything code 3, so we move cars around. It's not so structured and finite, that's the way it is. So it just depends on the status of the fleet and where the needs are, how many we replace, how many we can move then to other assignments and get them out of that primary response number of 27. That being said, I also want to mention Captain Heisland's been gracious enough. He's my fleet manager, and he's here, so if I go sideways, he can correct me. Okay? Does that answer your second question?
Yeah, I think it.
I'm sorry, and then the rest about the Dodges. We haven't had them on the road very long. It takes a while to get them here, and it took us an inordinate amount of time to get them outfitted. And I think, I speculate, maybe know that Dodge is not used to this, and really, God bless them, but they were kind of searching for the proper way of doing what they need to do and working with us and getting those cars here, and we had difficulty, delayed time in getting them, the equipment put on them. So some of those cars haven't really been on the road more than a month or so. Yeah, about a month. So we don't have a history on them to really be able to gauge those, and we will with time, of course. And we got the Dodges because Ford removed themselves from the market. They had a hybrid they couldn't vouch for. Nobody knew anything about them, admittedly, so we wanted to steer away from the Ford. As far as next year, probably the simplest way to look at it is if we replaced no vehicles this year, 13 would go to 21 at least next year. There are 8 vehicles. There are 2 that are kind of in the gray area, so I'm going to exclude them and just say we're going to keep them. That leaves them with 8 additional vehicles, that will be approaching 140,000. Our average projection now for those other 8 is 137,000 miles next early summer, June, when we think they might be here and be replaced. So if one would add the 8 and the 13, that's 21, minus however many cars we may be allowed this year. So it'll be 21 minus approved cars. I can get the exact mileage. I would guess that the average miles, considering let's assume we do receive 5 or 6 and we can take out the highest mileaged cars, the remaining 16 or 15 would have around 150,000 miles then next year. It's just snowballing, as we mentioned. So if we wanted to use the 5 or 6 as a subtraction number, we would have 15 or 16 averaging about 150,000 miles next year when we discuss those cars.
Now I understand that. I would guess that somewhere within the department exists a spreadsheet or something that has these vehicles listed and some data on them, so we can just tangibly have something in front of us.
We can provide that.
And then my assumption would be that vehicles purchased as these Dodges are coming online now, when the description is made earlier about a chase scenario and the wear and tear, that those vehicles would be inserted into the routine of activity so that they're utilized in those instances, because our communication to the public and the taxpayers is that police has made the case that their vehicles, they need safe vehicles that can handle the wear and tear in these situations. And when new police vehicles are purchased, I think we want to make sure that we can communicate back to say, and those are the vehicles you now see on the road. I remember the first time I saw one of those Dodges, I had to do a double take because I was like, "What? Oh, that's right. Ford quit making them." I thought it was another jurisdiction in town or something like that. But just as when the new fire vehicles came online, people could physically see them, and that those were the vehicle or the trucks that were responding to situations and there was kind of a connection so that the taxpayer could see, okay, when they talked about new police vehicles at the council meeting, I read the article in the paper, now I see them in action, this makes sense to me. That's
Yeah.
all, I just want to make
Well,
sure
with
that.
that being said, though, there's always a qualifier, and there's nothing absolute. So this year, we had trouble getting tires, pursuit-rated tires on the Dodges. So they're not all out there right now because of that reason. They're not safe for the emergency runs. They promised that Dodge will be able to get us those tires that will increase the level of safety, and we can use them, have more flexibility. So you can't say absolutely that happened this year, but there's a reason it didn't happen this year. That didn't happen every other year, but this year it did, so we had to be careful where we put them. And then I just would remind everybody that regardless of the assignment, even this year with the Dodges, that we have to be real careful about, no fault of anyone here, is that the fleet still improves. The old cars are gone. We have 10 cars that were really dangerous to operate that have been removed. And so the 10 cars here, regardless of where they're assigned, the fleet improved by purchasing those 10 new cars. It doesn't make any difference where they are. We're better off now than we were several months ago.
Good. And that's good to hear. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilman Graham.
I have two random questions. One is lap salaries. Ms. Mueller, as it relates to lap salaries, at the end of the year, our fiscal year, does that money go back to fund balance to help offset the fund balance?
It does revert to fund balance.
It does? Okay. So you'll know those numbers close to?
The end of the fiscal year.
In the fiscal year, maybe in that month that we would know? For example, I know police has some vacancies in communications as well as police officers, and there may be some other vacancies, all that will roll back into lap salary.
Correct. But there is a pay period that crosses fiscal years, so we will have to wait till after that pay period for the salaries and benefits to know for sure what is going to be accrued back to the time period for the fiscal year 19. So it's not going to be the beginning of October that we're going to know.
Right.
It's going to be after those payrolls have run, so we're talking probably mid-November.
Okay.
And with everything else, like we said earlier, it's more like the end of the calendar year that we're going to know what
Will go back into
what
fund
goes back to
balance.
fund balance.
Dan, I have another question for
Could I just add something on that, though? That's minus tornado-related kinds of things. Now, if that's not the way you all want to handle this, I need to know that now, or real soon, because, we got bills to pay. And so the alternative is I come to you and say, hey, we need a supplemental appropriation for X, Y, and Z, and we'll just keep going along as we're going along. I personally think it's easier to take it out of this year as much as we can, because one, those are expenditures related to this year, and two, it saves some time in getting those bills paid. But if that's not the way that you want to do it, there certainly are other ways to pay for that. But so in your case, there's a hunk of money that goes into that fund balance, but it's going to be less than we would ordinarily anticipate because we have bills to pay in the current year.
And so I guess if you need some type of direction or motion for that, then, I'm willing to do that. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I was just asking a question just so that
I just want to make sure
better.
that.
Right. And then I had another question too for Mr. Marash, as relates to the salt. Where are we at on salt?
The chemical, the chemical line item,
chemical.
I think we reduced it down a little bit in the final budget here just because a couple things, we got filled back up, and then the salt bid actually came in lower than we anticipated.
So we're filled right now though, right?
Yeah, it's nearly so.
Okay.
And so we feel pretty good about the chemical budget right now. Now that, again, I always
Right,
say,
it could change,
come, midwinter, we may have a different idea.
but we're filled right now.
Yeah.
Good.
We're at our
Okay.
typical spot.
Thank you.
Councilman Hussey.
I guess, Steve, I just want to follow up quickly on the tornado and flood spending and philosophical where it sort of comes out of, because really it comes out of the same in the end.
Sure.
I guess, do you have any concerns for long-term budgeting purposes in future years that this year will be kind of an anomaly in a way that it'll be harder to have good year-to-year comparisons because we have ended up funding potentially so many things out of the annual operating budget, as opposed to just giving you authority to dip into the fund balance right now to go pay these bills out of a fund balance, knowing that you'll run the normal budget like you and department directors do, that ends up kicking that money back into the fund balance at the end of the year. I mean, it's just another way to account. I guess I'm just worried in 1, 2, and 3 years when the council looks at these spreadsheets, is this going to be a good benchmark year to look at because we have funded things that were of an emergency nature? Am I making sense?
Yes, and Marge may want to add to this. My response would be that the items are budgeted now. I'll use salaries because that's the one that I think is the easiest. We've got a money in there for salaries, and for some reason that all that money doesn't get used. Somebody leaves the city, or we hire somebody at a lesser, or whatever those things are. So in the budget, we still have that salary number at the full number that goes over the number of years. I think it's going to be more difficult to make some of the, not more difficult, but it'll be, we have to make sure we understand that as we're looking at the fund balance expenditures, because we're not going to have as much added to fund balance. So for example, if we were to take, from my point of view, Margie may have another thought, if we take the money out of fund balance, it almost, to me, gives kind of almost a subsidized picture of the budget. We're not really showing in the account all the expenses related to the tornado in the year that they occurred. I think either way it works. It's just one pocket or the other. But so from a historical point of view, yeah, it's going to, we'll probably have an asterisk down there that says, tornado, flooding, and big kinds of things. But that can always happen. Margie may want to add something to add to that.
Well, as far as your remarks about how it's going to look, like for future, when you look back, obviously we're going to have more in overtime expenditures this year than we would in a normal year. But as far as those other expenses, those accounts payable type of bills that we've been paying, we have segregated it to an account for tornado and an account for flood. So it'll be very easy to pick out and know what we've spent on those items.
If we knew the big hunk of money, we wrecked a car and it's this much money, and we could come to you and say, here's the amount we need out of fund balance and we're done. I just don't know yet. We just got bills that are coming in, and some of the expenses, they're overtime. Well, we spent doing overtime on tornado stuff, but not other stuff that we had. So, there's an overtime budget in there, but we weren't doing other potholes or those kinds of things.
I just wanted to clarify one more thing in response to Councilman Hussey's question. Except for some of the unique difficulty we've had with the Dodge make, yes, you can assure people that the new cars go to patrol and they're utilized for that purpose. That's the short answer.
And I know we're going to have huge expenses over time as relates to the tornado and the flooding, but we also going to have it's going to be compounded when we look at the Darnell Gray case. We had officers out there, looking for the child for several days, so that's going to add up as well too. So we look at the full fund balance and not just just the tornado and fire, but look for example, looking at the Darnell Gray case as well too. So all that overtime is going to compound. So I totally agree with what you're saying, Steve.
Any closing thoughts from finance? Any request from council to finance or to our administrator for materials for next week? Okay. I do...
Just make sure that we follow the procedures we set up, that any of these areas that we're taking money from, that they have an opportunity to let them know to come to our meetings so that they can plead their case if they so wish to do so.
Okay, can we get the word out on the departments? And this, that's being displayed, can that be sent out? From my angle, I'm having a hard time
Sure.
taking that all in.
Yeah, we'll send it out tonight or
Okay,
tomorrow.
very good. Greg Garrett's, the mayor couldn't join us tonight. She had an event, the CASA event across the river to represent the city. We will reconvene August the 26th at 5:30 in these chambers.
Can I ask one final question? And I apologize for this. As I look up here, did we do an increase for the adoption of the animals at the animal this year?
It's in the revenue line already,
It's in the
yes.
revenue line on it?
In the budget.
It's like 43,000 in the budget, under the revenue lines for the increase in the adoption fees.
It's not on the screen.
It's what, Steve?
You've got it in the budget.
It's already in the
Okay.
revenue line.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
not on the screen.
Okay.
It's not up there. It's up there.
I just want to keep that in
Yep.
the back of my head.
Yeah, they did. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, it's been moved to adjourn. Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand.